talking, like he's going to do nothing.
You guys are fancy.
Yeah.
It's for the video. Last night the mic didn't work. It was like terrible. But they still mic'd us up for the video.
I always mic that.
At least we sound like we know what we're doing in the video.
Oh, for sure.
I'm sorry? Yeah? I don't know.
You make us look bad that you have a whole presentation.
I know. Was that discussed on the Zoom
I
call?
thought that's
I don't
what
think
we
so,
said.
no?
I said I told you.
I was like, I didn't think I could speak well, but I think I
I'm
heard
doing
well.
like a background on like
Good evening, everyone.
early diagnostic.
Maybe because of medical things.
I'm just going to say, whatever you do what you need to do. You're the boss.
Are you based up in Miami?
I live in New York. But I come here pretty often. Well, not that often, like 5 times a year. Yeah, we have like reciprocity.
You said you were here yesterday at an event?
Yeah, I'll show you. We had like a women's event. They had like massage and food.
What was it for?
It was the same kind of thing, but like for women here.
Okay, go for it. This is for you.
It was like nice event.
This is for you. You can put in your like this. There you go. You can switch pockets. You can put on the camera. Okay.
How do we know it's turned on?
Hmm?
How do we know it's turned on or off? I don't want a hot mic situation.
Oh, no, no, no. This is just for the video. You're not going to hear them. You're not going to
But
like make
they
noise.
will get a hot mic. I guess the good news is I don't have one. You know, I won't have any problems.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate your time, your interest, and your support. To learn more about what tonight's event is called Building Our Nation. We're privileged to have experts in their own respective fields, Dr. Bardos in reproductive endocrinology, Dr. Ramasamy in the field of male infertility, and Dr. Goldstein in psychology, and giving us the emotional angle of a very difficult journey called Building Our Nation, and people who are struggling with building our nation, people who are struggling to have children, and unfortunately infertility rates are just too high. 1 out of every 7 couples struggling to conceive, whether it's one child facing primary infertility, a second child or third child secondary infertility. It's an issue that unfortunately is prevalent in our community, in all communities, but it's something which is so special and something so sensitive in our Jewish community, and it's events like tonight that raise awareness, that bring this to the forefront, to make sure that we're aware and that we understand, and that we're educated and empowered to know what issues are out there, what could be the potential issue of any given couple, and as I said, empower with the experts to learn what the next steps are, what the most appropriate next steps are, who to turn to, who are our resources, to see to it that every single Jewish couple, every single Jewish person has an address, where to turn, whom to refer to, who can they call in a time of need. So what I would like to do is really to call up our first speaker, which will be Dr. Bardos from CCRM, who will tell us a little bit about female factor infertility. We'll continue the conversation, and then we'll hopefully later in the night bring everything together, the synthesis between medicine and halacha, and then with the emotional angle, and hopefully everyone will walk away with a complete package, a complete understanding and a wholesome understanding of the big picture of infertility, and see how we can do our parts to help Am Yisrael, to help grow and build our nation. So without further ado, Dr. Yona Bardos.
What
Siona Bardos? You can't hear me.
So you need me to start over again?
So maybe am I just not loud enough? Is that the problem?
You have to shout. Does this work?
Shouting is not, I don't do that to my kids.
Is that
Sorry.
better?
Yeah, this works.
That one?
Yeah.
Try.
Try on. Yeah, okay. I don't want to make any of that squeaky noise. Probably not working. All right, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, there you go, fine. So first of all, thank you to the organizers and for this, for inviting me to speak tonight. This is really obviously near and dear to my heart, and this organization I think is something that does some really great work. So I am a fertility specialist. Still. Where's the AV people?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe just hold it.
Hello? Okay, so now I gotta be like one of those singers. I feel like I'm at a comedy club and now I'm just gonna start riffing. Anyways, okay, so thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Really, I think this is such an important topic, an important event, and really an important organization. I am a fertility specialist, a reproductive endocrinologist. I also did a fellowship trained in reproductive genetics and specialty trained in recurrent pregnancy loss. I also got my smicha from Yeshiva University, REITS, and examen from Goldberg and Tisrael. And I really enjoy combining kind of all of my training in helping my patients. So I was tasked today to kind of go over a little bit with, I was tasked today to really kind of set the evening for the objectives, a little bit about the medical side. So what is infertility? What are some of the causes of infertility? What does the workup look like? And then I'll finish with a little bit about what some of the treatment options are. So what exactly is infertility? So infertility is really the failure to achieve a pregnancy after a certain period of time. So in the under 35 crowd, we typically say if a couple has been trying for 12 months of regular unprotected intercourse and they've been unsuccessful, so then that's typically when it's recommended that they go seek additional care. If you're a little bit older, I wouldn't call it older, but slightly older, at age 35, because we know that the ovary starts declining, just beginning to decline at around 35, we say 6 months. 6 months of trying, not pregnant, come see a fertility specialist. But there are other reasons to see a fertility specialist sooner, and that's if you have things like irregular menses. So if you're skipping periods, if your periods are greater than 35 days, especially in the femme community, if it's shorter, so for example 26, 25 days, you're likely ovulating before you go to the mikvah, definitely a reason to see a fertility specialist. Other reasons include endometriosis, so more severe endometriosis, tubal factors, so if you know you have issues with your tubes, if you know you have, there's no male issues, which I'll let Dr. Ramasamy talk about, as well as any known familial genetic mutation. These are all reasons to come see a fertility specialist early. So as Rabbi Segelman mentioned, it's quite common. Between 1 in 6 and 1 in 8 couples struggle with infertility. And some people might say, well, that sounds a little too much. You know, I remember back my wife's telling me I'm not well enough. Some people might say, well, you know, 20 years ago, I didn't hear so much about this. So what has been going on in the last couple of decades that there's so many people struggling with infertility? And the truth is, the incidence actually hasn't changed that much. What has changed, though, is a few things. So one is the general population, the number of people who are trying to get pregnant are typically older. So often patients are attempting pregnancy later on in life, and that is associated with having a little bit harder time. Additionally, because of organizations and events like this, there's starting to be more awareness. So people are now more aware that their friends or other people are struggling. But to be honest, we're not doing a good enough job. And that's one of the reasons why this organization and these events are so important. We really do need to bring more awareness. But finally, another reason why it seems like it is because, honestly, 3 decades ago, we weren't doing a very good job. IVF was in its infancy. Your chance of success if you actually sought care was probably about 1 to 2% every time you tried treatment. So a lot of people weren't even getting care. Now, if you come, for example, at CCRM in my lab, high quality tested embryo, is 70% chance of a live birth, take home baby when I put an embryo back. So we've really come a long way over the last 3 So where does the 1 year come from? Why do we say 1 year? So the reason why is because, and this kind of gives you a little bit of idea on why, where we've come up with the different numbers. So when couples are trying to get pregnant the first time, especially when they're first married, their chance of getting pregnant per cycle is somewhere around 20%. Right? It's not as high as some people might think. And the vast majority of couples will actually get pregnant within 5 to 6 months. And you can see that by 6 months, 72% of people will likely get pregnant. And that's the reason why when I have, give me a funny look, this is old data, it's not new. It's from 1956, but it hasn't changed much since then. The reason why is so oftentimes I'll see couples who at 6 months will say, should I come seek help? And I always say, yes, absolutely. There's no reason not to. The reason why I say that is because most people will have conceived by that point, and therefore, if they want to come see me earlier, they can. And then the reason the 1 year kind of mark is, and this is another thing that's so important, is sometimes I see couples who have been trying for 2, 3, 4 years, and we really need to do better. They should be coming and seeing me earlier. As you can see, when they go from that 1 year mark to that 2 year mark, only 8% increase in their chance of getting pregnant over that entire year. And for anyone who has struggled with infertility, that is devastating. Every single month, getting their period, and there's just no reason for them to suffer. So they definitely they should be seeing us earlier. So I'm going to geek out just for a little bit and kind of talk a little bit about what the causes of infertility are. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because it is unbelievably fascinating, the reproductive system that Akash Baruch Hu created. And it really all starts with the brain. So all of my patients know I usually draw really bad stick figures in the office, but I have a little bit better presentation here today. So what does it take in order to get pregnant? And this will kind of set the stage for all of what we do and the workup and some of the treatment options. So the first thing is it starts with the brain. The brain sends a signal to the ovary. It sends LH and FSH, called egg food. Basically tells the ovary, hey, make me some eggs. The ovary starts making an egg and sends a signal back called estrogen to the brain that says, thank you so much for the food. I got enough. My eggs are growing. Stop sending me food. And that conversation kind of goes back and forth until typically one egg is made. When that egg gets large enough, it gets released. When you ovulate, it gets released from the ovary. And then what happens is the fallopian tube, which in a picture it looks like it's hanging out like this, but in reality it's kind of squished down. It's got to jump out, grab that egg. And now when a couple has intercourse, typically about 20 million sperm are deposited inside. Only about 200 make it in tubes. Vast majority get lost. So, the old joke about men not having direction, it actually comes from biology. They're basically flopping around, they cannot find their way. Vast majority get lost. Only about 200 actually make it to the tube. And then, if you're lucky and the sperm is there at the right time, because the egg is impatient, it stays there for about 24 hours, it's gone. So sperm's got to meet it, got to find it, got to fertilize it, then grows in the egg in the tube for about 5 days, gets slowly moved down, and then it's got to find a good location inside the uterus to implant. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that have to go right in order for a patient to get pregnant. So what are some of the primary causes of infertility? So this is such an important slide because a lot of time there's so much focus on the female, and there's so much burden that the female takes on, and a lot of things where they feel that they're carrying the majority. But in reality, that's just simply not true. About 40% of the time, it is female related. 40% of the time, it's male related, and that's so important to realize. About 10% of the time, it's somewhat combined. So we'll find some mild factors that overlap between the two, and about 10% of the time, unexplained. We don't have a good reason yet, and typically, we often will find them through the treatment process. Focusing a little bit more on the females, the particular causes of females. So about 40% of the time, when it is related to the female, it has to do with what's called ovulatory dysfunction. Basically, the ovary, there's some issues happening at the level of the ovary. So this can be a couple of different things. It could be, for example, something called diminished ovarian reserve, which essentially just means that the ovary is not working at the level that it could be. It's not making enough eggs, or the eggs that they have aren't genetically good, in which case the chances of getting pregnancy go down. Other things can be simply, you're not releasing an egg. So something like PCOS, which is quite common, quite common in the frum community actually. That is just simply a situation where women aren't ovulating. If you're not ovulating, if you're not releasing that egg, as you remember from the previous slides, you're not going to get pregnant. It can be endocrine disorders, obesity, anorexia. Those are all reasons why someone may not be releasing an egg. Another is the tubal pathology. So if there's something wrong with the tubes, people have had ectopic pregnancies, they've had surgeries, even C-sections, so you can have inflammation and scarring on the inside that can prevent that tube, right? Remember that tube is sitting here, it's got to go grab that egg. If it's squished, if it's been prior surgery or inflammation on the inside, it may not move as well. Endometriosis is another one, so severe endometriosis is caused about 15% of the time. And part of the smaller, but definitely something I see frequently in the front community is the short cycle. And I mention that because it's so important to people, oftentimes, especially if you're seeing non-Frum doctors or non-Jewish doctors, they may not pick up on this, right? So average woman goes to the mikvah at least 12 days, right? At least on the day 12. If you have a cycle that's 26 days long, you ovulate 14 days before you get your period, which means you're always ovulating on day 12, which means you may be ovulating before you go to the mikvah. If you bleed for a day longer, you missed it. If you have a day shorter cycle, you've missed it. And there's a lot of things that we can do from both the halachic side and from the medical side to help with that. So it's another thing that's just really important. So I'm going to just briefly go over what a workup looks like. So what do we do? How do we figure this out to help these couples? So I kind of break it into 5 categories: brain, ovary, tubes, uterus, and then the male part. So what do we do for the brain? Basically blood work. So we're looking to see at various different hormones that the brain releases. We look at some of the hormones that the ovary releases, and together we can kind of put that together and get an idea of how well that brain-ovary communication is working. Then we'll do a little bit of imaging. So this is typically all done in the first half of a woman's cycle. We'll want to look and see what do the ovaries look like, how many little eggs are ready to get used in this cycle. We'll want to see if those tubes are open. So it's an X-ray that we do, the tubes. And this can all be done at the fertility center. So for example, at CCRM, we have a 16,500 brand new square foot gorgeous facility. We do everything on site, soup to nuts. And then the last part is the uterus. We want to look and make sure that lining is good to accept a pregnancy. And I will skip over the semen analysis and leave that to our male colleagues. And then lastly, I'll end with just a brief review of treatment, so people have some idea of what are some of the treatment options that are available for patients struggling with infertility. So the first thing, the most basic one, is timed intercourse. Simply just making sure that the couple is able to have relations at the time, or really the day or two before ovulation. And this is a common misnomer. People don't realize that the optimal time when you're trying to conceive to have relations is really 1 to 2 days before you ovulate. Not after you ovulate, not when your basal body temperature changes, because that's already 3 days after you've ovulated. And so that's really such an important thing. If you think about it, it's one of the things I always found fascinating about the way Chazal designed, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu designed the whole nervous system. At the end of the day, most women, so let's say the majority of women have a 28-day cycle. They go to the mikvah on day 12 or 13. Most women ovulate on day 14. Perfect. So that system, I always found that really fascinating. So time intercourse is probably the most basic intervention. We can then do something called ovulation induction. And that's essentially where we give the patient some medication to take by mouth, and that can help push the ovary a little bit to grow 1 egg. And now we'll do what's called a trigger shot, causes the ovary to release the egg, and we tell them when to have relations. So we combine that too. For our patients with unexplained infertility, for example, we can sometimes add in intrauterine insemination. And what that is basically, instead of making 1 egg a month like the woman was done with previously, we'll have her make, let's say, 2 eggs. I call it boosting fertility, boosting your chance of getting pregnant. So now we're having the woman make 2 eggs. Instead of the sperm being deposited in the vagina, we're taking the sperm, cleaning it, taking the best sperm, and we're putting now 10 million or 15 million sperm right into the top of the uterus as close as possible to the fallopian tubes to try to really increase that chance of that couple conceiving. And then last thing really is just the IVF, the in vitro fertilization. I could give a whole hour-long talk on it, so I'll just briefly address it. But essentially what that is that's our way of overriding the system. We tell the brain, thank you, have a good day. We give the woman actually directly those hormones, that LH and FSH, the egg food, and then we're constantly checking the patient. Typically, it's a very intense process. They can be coming in every other day or every day early in the morning. It's quite stressful, can be at times. and we try to make as many eggs as safe as possible. Once there's enough that look like they're likely to be mature, because only mature eggs can fertilize, they get a medication, they come into the operating room, they go to sleep. We extract all those eggs, we take the partner sperm, we put them together, and we grow them in our 5-star hotel laboratory. Then we can, once they're embryo, we can put them back in for pregnancy. I will end with just one thing. Just wanted to talk briefly about egg freezing because it's such an important topic. Recently, I had a couple a woman at age 38, she froze her eggs. She's now 50, got married at age 49, and now she's able to get pregnant with her eggs. Something that normally would not have been possible to have a genetic child. So I think it's just so important, especially as more and more people are getting married later in life, just to keep in the back of your mind. So what exactly is egg freezing? It's essentially just it's the first half of the IVF process. We make as many eggs as possible, and then after we take them out, we simply freeze them. When they're frozen, they're good for a long time. They're good for 20 years. It does a few things. For a lot of the patients, it just kind of takes that stress off of them. They now know that they have their eggs frozen and can get used in the future. The time that I generally recommend, somewhere between age 27 and 33. So if someone's choosing. And the reason why, what you can see here on the chart here, is that is when the ovaries' eggs are most likely to be genetically normal. You see that kind of curve at the bottom, somewhere between 27 and 33. I have patients anywhere between 25 and 40, all coming in for that purpose. But it's definitely something I think that's important just to mention and to keep in mind. And with that, I will finish, and I'll be open. I think we're going to have a panel discussion at the end, so I'll leave that.
Very good. Or just leave
Yeah,
it.
just leave it. Yeah, it's a nice background.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Do that myself.
Want me to introduce you?
No.
How's this? Dr. Ramasamy.
Yes, thank you. Guys, thank you very much for being here. I do not have slides like Dr. Bardos does, so we'll keep this fairly informal and hopefully people will have questions at the end. I think one of the most important points that Dr. Bardos mentioned was male fertility can be up to 40% of the time, right? So people often think fertility is a female issue and women have all responsibility with fertility, and somehow the men are all perfect in this relationship. And I think it's just unfortunate that society has taught us that way. And finally, I think we're waking up to the fact that men can have actually fertility issues. They can have low sperm counts. Their sperm cannot function well, even though they have good sperm counts. So I think we are finally understanding that it takes two to tango, and it is important for men to have optimal sperm counts and good quality, at the same time for women to have optimal egg counts and egg quality. So I think the concept between, that there is equal contribution between males and females. Just as a brief overview, I think one of the first things that we try and do, anybody that has either a low sperm count or a quality, is we try and see what we can do to try and improve it just with basic stuff. So lifestyle modifications. Dr. Eduardo Pazzi is here, one of our fellows. We're doing a study trying to see if we can lose weight and try to see if we can improve sperm counts and sperm quality. Dr. Miller here, we're trying to see what the impacts of cannabis. So many of the drugs are now more frequently used, most prevalently used, becoming legal in most states within the United States. We have no idea what the impact of these drugs are on male fertility. Yes, people can have normal sperm counts, but what's going to change with the actual sperm quality? Are these sperm going to be used when they actually are being used for IVF, right? Are they going to make kids that are normal, embryos that are normal? Just lots of unanswered questions. I think one of the basic things that we try to do is just lifestyle modifications. Are you using a huge study that came out recently showing cell phone use? Like lots of cell phone use directly pointed at the testes. We're now going from 5G to 6G to 7G. We're going to iPhone 15, and every year we keep changing the phone without realizing if it could potentially have harmful impacts on the actual sperm. Joginder's here. He's actually investigating, what changes with the exact sperm genetics, right? We keep advancing technology. Now have AI that's coming around, and we have no idea what it's going to do to reproduction, evolution, and sperm quality. A lot of people here, our previous generation, when they had kids, we didn't have such technology. Right? We didn't have to worry about whether cell phones are affecting our sperm counts. We didn't have to worry about if marijuana is affecting our sperm counts. But now with this technology that's advancing, society that's advancing, and actually, I don't know about the word advancing, but just changing, I think we, as reproductive urologists, need to understand all of its potentially impacts on sperm. Because there's lots of talk about, oh my gosh, the sperm count is going down worldwide. Men, as they get older, unlike women, there's a beautiful graph showing, embryos get bad as women get older. I think we are now realizing men also can get older. I always describe this to patients as like a factory. Yes, when you go through puberty, you start making sperm. And yes, people at age 80 can still have, sperm and still have babies, but I think you may start making bad quality sperm, right? It's a factory, and it cannot repair some of the old sperm that are being made as men get older. So yes, can you have kids? Yeah, sure. But the chances of having kids with potential abnormalities and genetic diseases probably does go up as men get older. So just because you have sperm doesn't necessarily mean they're good. All of this, we are actually actively researching at the University of Miami because we don't know answers to so many of these questions, because male fertility as a field is really evolving only now, because now society and medicine and researchers are waking up to the fact that men can also be part of this equation, and we actually have to understand a lot more than we just say, oh great, he has sperm, let's go have kids. Some of the things that we can actually try to improve sperm counts are testosterone deficiencies. It's becoming very common. People often thought it was a disease of older men have low testosterone, but we're now seeing up to 20 to 30% of men can have low testosterone. Sedentary lifestyle, COVID. We made kids stay at home indoors, not as active anymore. Video games, computer games, cell phones, right? We are not leading the same active lifestyles as we used to in the past. And so now what has gone up? Obesity has gone up. Fast foods have gone up. Kids are getting heavier. And so therefore sperm counts will continue to decline. And so we do see testosterone deficiency being as one of the major causes for why sperm counts are low. And thankfully we have medications that we can try to improve testosterone, but at the same time also improve sperm counts and quality. One of the most common conditions in men is something called varicocele, which happen very commonly in adolescents and young men, but thankfully does not affect sperm counts in majority of the people that have this condition. Just like varicocele veins in the legs that we have, the same exact concept, varicose veins around the testis can increase the temperature of the testis and therefore affect sperm production in both quantity and quality. And so a simple surgery or an embolization procedure can actually improve sperm counts by about 50%. It's a same-day surgery. It's probably the most common surgery that we do in male fertility. And the most severe condition that we and Dr. Bardos collaborate pretty closely is men who have no sperm at all, or very few sperm. And those are, I think, the toughest conditions that we deal with. Very difficult to go through the couple, discuss all of the possibilities, trying to do surgery to find sperm. But certainly we do have solutions thanks to IVF. We on the male side are able to also help. But thanks everybody for the opportunity. Love to hopefully take questions after Dr. Goldstein talks. So thank you.
So we've heard from Dr. Bardos, we've heard from Dr. Ramasamy, the male side of issues, the female side of the issues. What I would like to do now is just present the halachic perspective on some of these issues, and then we'll wrap up with Dr. Goldstein, who will give us the emotional side. After hearing the medical side from the women, the medical side from the man, and then the halachic difficulty and the halachic journey, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that, and how do we support each other through this extremely difficult process? So, as Dr. Bardos so beautifully presented, there is a workup. There is a workup of fertility, and when a woman is going through the infertility journey, so there are many issues that come up on a medical side, but we don't realize often that those issues present halachic questions as well. I'll give you an example. Dr. Bardos said a few times that in order to test the woman, so sometimes we need blood tests. In order to monitor her, we need to take blood. Now, those blood tests, not necessarily a one-time blood test, especially if she's in a cycle or an IVF cycle, and we need to know when to give her the proper medication, when to actually harvest the eggs. So there's a blood test that needs to be taken, and sometimes that blood test falls out on Shabbos. What is the patient supposed to do when that blood test falls out on Shabbos? Or throughout the week, or so the 10 days, 12 days, whatever it is, before a woman has her egg retrieval, whether it's egg freezing, a single woman, or an IVF cycle. Every day there are injectables. And then comes Shabbos. Do we inject on Shabbos? Is that a problem? To take the injection on Shabbos, to prepare the injection, to actually carry out the injection on Shabbos? What happens if the retrieval falls out on Shabbos? The doctors look at your lab work, they look at your sonograms, and they say the best time to retrieve this egg, the best time for you to come in to have an egg retrieval is going to be on Shabbos. So what do we do in those situations, in those scenarios, when Shabbos is in conflict with fertility training? And these are many of the questions that we get here at PUAH, that basically his entire presentation from the medical side, but what happens when it conflicts with halacha? So Shabbos is one of those examples. Sometimes people get upset at my presentations because I just throw out a lot of questions, but I don't actually answer them. Should we answer them? The people. Pikuach nefesh. What's the pikuach nefesh? The pasuk says, was it Rachel who said, if I don't have children, it's like I'm dead? Mesa anochi. I think Mama Rachel said that. So perhaps our matriarch Rachel, who claimed to have been dead, should she not have any children, so perhaps in the poetic sense and in a deep psychological sense, perhaps Dr. Goldstein will comment on that, a person feels dead. But there is a real question whether we can consider this pikuach nefesh. I'll give you another example, because I'm just asking more questions. It was a case in Eretz Yisrael that happened that in the middle of the night, on Friday night, the doctors received a notification that the electricity had gone out in the lab. They lost power. So that's probably one of your worst nightmares, but not really, because I'm sure the lab is well equipped with double and triple and quadruple backup generators, so it's not really an issue. But if you don't have those backup generators, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of genetic material, which is all being frozen with liquid nitrogen. Once the electricity goes out, just a matter of time where those embryos, eggs, those gametes thaw, can't be used ever again. I mean, it's horrific. It's horrific to think about it. The notification came to the doctors in the middle of the night on Friday night, Shabbos. You have to get there immediately. You have to, turn the switch back on, however you fix that. Are you allowed to drive in the car in order to get to that lab so that you're able to turn the lights back on, to turn the energy back on, to turn the electricity back on? Some people say yes, some people say no. Really, the only time we drive on Shabbos...
Guys, speak up.
When do we drive on Shabbos? We drive on Shabbos to save a life. If a person, if there's a Hatzalah call, and there's a question of pikuach nefesh, you don't think twice. You get in the car. What is the status of an embryo? Is the embryo life? In which case you get into the car, because if that life doesn't make it, that's pikuach nefesh. Yes? I'll play devil's advocate for a moment. If you say yes, so then you're going to have a hard time discarding unused embryos, because that could be considered an abortion. So if you understand and consider that an embryo pre-implantation is considered life, and would therefore allow a pikuach nefesh heter, the permissibility to drive in the car on Shabbos to see to it that the electricity can be restored and the embryos will not thaw, so that means you're treating it like life, and once you get the PGD report that this is aneuploidy, this one is trisomy 13, this one is trisomy 18, this one has too few chromosomes, this has too many chromosomes, you should not be able to throw that out, because that could be considered an abortion. So halacha l'maisa, on a practical level, the poskim in Eretz Yisrael, when they were dealing with this question of whether or not you're allowed to travel in the car to the fertility lab in order to restore the energy, they did not permit a Jewish person to drive, but it could be done through a non-Jewish person, Amir al-Nachri, to have someone else, like a taxi driver, similar to cases when people go to the hospital for non-life-threatening issues. So maybe they don't go themselves, but they'll have a non-Jewish driver drive them. Similarly, when it comes to discarding embryos, we do not hold that the discarding of an embryo is considered like a termination. We do not view discarding of embryos as an abortion, and should a couple no longer need their embryos. They have their embryo, they have their children, they're not planning on having any more children. Perhaps this embryo is not even a healthy one, and they're getting billed we get this question all the time. And I always know, sometimes I joke with myself, I'll ask them, the question will be, do we have to hold on to our embryos, or can we discard them? So I'll say, when is your billing cycle over? They're like, how did you know? It's today. So they'll get the bill in the mail that they have to pay for another year of storage, and they wonder to themselves, do I really have to pay for a whole other year of storage? I'm not going to use these embryos. Well, if you tell me that I'm not allowed to discard them because it's an abortion, then I'm going to pay all the money in the world. I'm not going to discard these embryos. But if I know that I'm really never going to use them, right? So we tell our people who call us at PUAH that if you're absolutely crystal clear, 100% certain that you're never, ever, ever going to use those embryos, from a halachic standpoint, from the standpoint of Jewish law, there is no prohibition to discard embryos. Absolutely not. It is not considered life. The Jewish religion views life beginning with implantation in the uterus. Prior to implantation in the uterus, the genetic material, it's precious, but it doesn't have the status of life. Speaking of doing things not ourselves, but with a non-Jewish person on Shabbos, let's say, we mentioned that the doctor will often tell a patient that they need blood work on Shabbos. And we can't necessarily come to the lab on Shabbos. So what we have, what PUAH has, is an amazing service, a phlebotomy service, where a non-Jewish nurse, a non-Jewish phlebotomist will come to the house of the patient on Shabbos morning, draw blood, and will deliver the blood to the lab at the exact time that the patient would be there, and they literally hand deliver the blood to allow the lab to look at the blood, run the numbers, and then the nurses can call or text the patient and have that, whatever the instructions are, whether they need to trigger that night or whether they need to continue with their injectables, the patient will see the message coming in, perhaps it'll be after Shabbos, and that is one of the ways that we're able to circumvent the Shabbos issue and also not compromise medical care whatsoever. We'll still be able to get the doctors the blood. That is one example of the mission of PUAH. PUAH really began 40 years ago when IVF hit the scene. I'll just throw out one trivia question. When was the first IVF baby born? What year was the first IVF baby born? The first successful case of IVF? 1978. 1978. Ding, 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 ding. So you can see me after for your prize. In 1978, Louise Brown was born. And at that point, it was amazing. And all of the Jewish community, especially the people who were longing to have children, they approached the Rabbanim and they asked, is this something that we're able to celebrate? Is this something that we're able to take advantage of? And the answer was no. At the time, the answer was no. And the reason why the answer was no was because there were so many unknowns. This was so new to Judaism, this was so new to halacha, to Jewish law, this was so new to medicine, that the rabbis didn't have the proper understanding of the technologies, the medicine, and the halacha to permit these treatments. And PUAH was founded by Rav Mordechai Eliyahu and Rav Menachem Borstein, one of his main Talmidim. They met and they said these words, Ad kan. We can't go on anymore. People were coming to Rav Mordechai Eliyahu for brachot. Can I have a blessing? Can I have a blessing? And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu said, I can't continue to give them a blessing when I know that the technology is readily available. So we have to figure out a way that we can identify all of the issues, identify all of the halachic issues, all of the issues that are questionable, problematic. Once we identify them, we address them, and we figure out how can each and every issue be rectified. How can each one be addressed? And slowly but surely, PUAH began. At first, it was very small. It was just having the observers in the labs. One of the main issues was that the Rabbanim were concerned. How are we supposed to allow the sperm and the egg to go behind closed doors? No one knows what's going on. Maybe there's going to be a mix-up. His sperm, her egg may go with the wrong person. It's going to compromise the yichus, the lineage of Jewish lineage, which is so important. And for that reason, many Rabbanim said we can't do it. For that reason alone, there is no permissibility to go ahead with IVF. So PUAH came up with this idea. Hey, in the restaurants, a mashgiach works. You make sure that the mashgiach who's in the restaurant makes sure that all the meat that comes in is kosher. The milchiks is over here, the fleishiks over here. The meat and the milk doesn't mix. If it works for a restaurant, why can't it work for our family? And you know what? That was a good question. And thank God with the foresight and the brilliance of PUAH and the people, the Rabbanim who were working, 40 years ago, they put together a system where we have observers in the lab, and would like to publicly acknowledge the observers that we have here today. Thank you very much for coming and for all of the work that you do here in Florida. And slowly but surely, one rabbi after the next, we're signing on to the permissibility of IVF, of IUI, of the various treatments in halacha. What we like to say is that PUAH is an organization that opens doors. That there are couples who have closed doors in front of them. There are people who have closed doors in front of them, whether those are medical doors or halachic doors. And it's our mission to sit with each and every couple, each and every patient, to discuss their situation and to understand more about their situation and figure out how can we open a door and how can we make a Jewish baby bring that light into such a dark home. As Dr. Bardo said, he could speak for an hour about IVF. I could speak for 2 hours because I'm a rabbi professionally. So rabbis professionally, I heard a good joke. Rabbis, they're very good drivers, right? But when it comes to parking, right? When it comes to actually stopping to speak, then they have a very difficult time. Driving, they can, but parking is an issue. So I'm going to park tonight, and I'm going to give over the mic to Dr. Goldstein. But I think what we have thus far accomplished is we've been able to successfully show the community what are some of the medical issues that take place for a female patient, what are some of the medical issues that take place for a male patient, what are some of the halachic issues that both the male and the female experience on any given cycle or any given situation when a couple is faced with infertility. And if that wasn't enough, they also have to face the challenges of the emotional struggle. It is so challenging to have a failed cycle, and then another failed cycle, followed by another failed cycle. And that's why it's so important to have people like Dr. Goldstein who are just true, the psychologists, the social workers, the people who understand the importance of the emotional part of this journey. So it's a then Dr. Bartos was talking about awareness. This is a major part of awareness, talking about this element of emotional health. So it's a pleasure and an honor to call upon Dr. Goldstein to present about emotional health.
Okay. Is it okay? Can I hold this? Am I good?
Perfect.
Okay, there's a lot of speaking, so I wonder if we could just take a moment. You want me to stand here? I want to connect with everyone. I feel like this is, like the old-fashioned therapist joke. I know we're talking all about old-fashioned research. The old-fashioned therapist. Sorry, your fancy picture might go down.
Unplug it.
The old-fashioned therapist is kind of like the therapist who sits behind a desk and is like, you go sit there. You're the one with the problem. I'm the one with the answer. I feel like this makes me feel like I'm like the one with the solutions. I don't have all the solutions. But okay, can we disconnect it? I just wonder for a moment if we could just notice that each of you showed up here tonight to learn something about yourself, about a loved one, about information. This is powerful information. For me as a human being, I'll introduce myself in a second, but listening to this information is heartwarming. Having events like this in the community is heartwarming because lack of knowledge is really where people are stuck. I love how the rabbi just shared about the rabbis really wanting to find solutions to problems. As an anxiety and a trauma specialist, I work a lot with people who struggle with relationships. And a lot of the relationship struggles are relationships with ourselves, relationships with our dreams, relationships with each other. And I want to talk a little bit about the concept of intimacy without fear, because when we have struggles in certain areas, then fear kind of creeps in. But just before I go on speaking, because I'm mesmerized and I'm digesting all the wisdom, I wonder if you could just take a moment. One of the biggest things is that we have a lot in our brain, but the body also needs time to digest information, right? From a neurocellular perspective, we have the brain that's processing, and then we need the body to come along for the ride. So what I'm going to invite you to do is if you could just take a moment to just get in touch with your body, okay? In front of the video. Hello. I have to make you happy. Okay, so if you could just take a moment, close your eyes if you're comfortable. Just notice your feet on the ground. If your legs are crossed, kind of feel your feet on the ground. Really just take a moment to get in touch with your body. This moment, a Wednesday evening here in Florida, okay? So just feel your feet on the ground. Notice your posture. Notice if you're hunched over, if you're sitting straight. Just notice that. And then what I want you to do is if you can gently put your right hand on your heart. Really just connect with your heart for just a moment, okay? Just notice any feelings, hopes, dreams, or just notice what it's like to get connected to your heart right here. And just breathe into your heart space. If it feels right, I want you to imagine almost getting in touch with maybe what the heart of the person to the right or the left of you might be feeling. One of the most powerful things that we can do is to spread love, connection, and hope to each other. So just feel that warmth of your hand on your heart. Feel your feet on the ground, and just take a breath. Okay, and when you're ready, you can kind of just like bring yourself back into the room, maybe shake your shoulders, notice any tension. I want you to be here with yourself, right? I'm going to share some information, but I want you to be here fully. Because there's a lot of brainy information, but one of the biggest things that we notice as people is that when we connect with our heart, when we connect with each other, there's a lot more possibility. One of the things, so just as an intro, myself, Esther Goldstein, I run and own a group practice in Long Island in New York. One of the doctors was asking, like we do have reciprocity, we treat clients in Florida as well. One of the things that I found really passionate, that I found to be really impactful, is people having knowledge and also people having the right support about what's possible. For me, as an Orthodox Jew, it is heartwarming to hear about from doctors, medical providers, and rabbis, to hear about the overlap of possibility, because the most devastating experience is when we feel like we're hit at like locked doors versus, okay, there's something that's doable. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. Please share anything that you learned tonight with your friends. So just from a scientific perspective, I want to share that there's two different ways that our minds and bodies operate. There's something called fight or flight, right? When we're feeling fear, when we have a struggle, we have a worry, we go into fight or flight. Fight or flight is like, let's say you're running in the jungle and there's a lion running after you. All of your energy is conserved inside. You can't connect with anyone, even yourself. You're just running away to get to safety. Then there's something, you run away from the lion, you're no longer in danger. Then the body goes to something called rest and digest. Rest and digest is when you can actually settle down, your digestive system works, and you can connect with yourself and with other people. One of the most important things is in relationships and in learning about ourselves is learning how to connect with ourselves and each other. And what happens when we go through infertility or we go through, let's say, I know Joelle last night was real heartwarming, was talking about how PUAH works with people who are either a couple who is waiting to have their first, to get pregnant. It could be somebody who's struggling with an illness and they want to save their eggs before they undergo cancer treatments. It could be somebody who wants to freeze their eggs. Last night, we ran an event for women, and one woman came over to us after and said because of the event, she's deciding to freeze her eggs. And it was just so heartwarming, and PUAH really connects like all of the dots, wherever somebody is at, as a resource and a possibility, okay? So one of the things I wanna help you do tonight, or take home with you, is to notice when fear kind of creeps into your minds or bodies. We'll talk a little bit about how when there's infertility, it impacts the male, how it impacts the female, and ways to help yourself move past and through fear, because we all have big emotions, to be able to get back into possibility. Because when we're feeling fearful, we can't reach out for help. We can't reach out to someone. We can't think about possibilities or connect with people. And that's part of living in the solution. But before I go there, I just want to say, I was reading an article the other day, because yesterday I actually flew in from New York, and there was, my flight kept being delayed, and I kept feeling frustrated. And then I was like, you know what, why don't we practice something called radical acceptance, which I really hate, because there's a part of me that loves doing and controlling and thinking and planning, and then there's a part of me that life teaches me, although I don't like this, not just about the plane, but that's an easy example without me sharing too much personal information, is about like accepting and really surrendering to what is. right? Life, from a spiritual perspective, from a physiological perspective, from a psychological and relational perspective, we're always in a dance with our lives of what we can do, and then when we want to let go and let God, so to speak, from a spiritual perspective. And so there's this quote from this concept of radical acceptance, which is actually connected to the concept of surrendering, which speaks about, well, pain is part of life. Radical acceptance, which I'll talk about it, because it doesn't mean approval. You can be like, I don't approve of the situation that God or the world or my life is giving me. I'm so angry. But I might still be I might choose to practice radical acceptance because it allows us to keep the pain from becoming suffering. Suffering is when we feel hopeless. It's when we're suffering extra. And each of you being here and these events is part of living in an empowered space of, I want to get knowledge, I want to know my options, I want to know what's possible with my situation or with struggles. And that is an act of self-love. Okay? So I do want to talk about the concept of kind of just sheer humanity of everyone in this room. Just how, we all suffer, we all dream, we all hope, and we all love. And we feel pain when what we have planned for our lives doesn't go according to our plans, or even our timelines. It really hurts, kind of like what the doctors were saying and the rabbi, like, there's a deep pain. And yes, from a psychological perspective, when there are people who are struggling, I speak to rabbis so many of the times, and besides for how it's inspiring for my clients, it's heartwarming to me when I see that we have a Torah and we have guidance that helps people feel like, I want to do this thing called life. Because people can feel often like, I don't want to do life anymore. Why should I be put into a world where I have suffering that feels like it's not fair? And although we can't take away difficulties and struggles, we could do our very best to be a loving hand, a supportive, resource to help them find the way through, okay? So I just want to talk about how the piece of infertility, navigating infertility, can be very isolating. All humans ache, all humans have hurt, but part of the piece that's really difficult with infertility, especially because it's like a private part of our lives, but then it almost becomes public. It can be incredibly isolating. Put me in front of the camera. It could feel sad, heavy, and lonely, and it could even feel shameful when we surround ourselves by the wrong kinds of people. You know those comments, and I was talking to Dr. Bardos about it, people make comments about, they mean to be nice, like, I know the right doctor, or I'll go say a prayer for you, or, oh, it's about time, or wow, you look so great, assuming that you're pregnant. And these comments make people feel like they just want the earth to swallow them up and to disappear. And one of the biggest pieces is surrounding yourself, connecting yourself to organizations like this. We were talking last night, a lot of women, about support groups, about really availing yourself of resources so that you can feel less isolated in this process. So I just want to talk for a minute about the research. Stanford had a study all about emotional distress of the women who were struggling with infertility. It impacted their sex life, and they had emotional distress that was 40% higher than those women who weren't navigating infertility struggles. And I'm not saying this to be like, oh wow, it's so hard. I'm saying this because if this is a struggle that you or a loved one is going through, I would like you to have a little bit of grace and extra compassion, because that makes all the difference. The right kind of understanding, being a loving person, educating yourself or educating people who are struggling, hey, this is what's going on, how can I help you? And I do want to name how the man and the woman grieve a little differently, right? When you have a plan for, partnering up or having a family, or you wanted to have a family at a certain age, there's a different kind of grief that people go through, right? They're both impacted. A woman might say, I've been penetrated by the ultrasound wand more than being with my husband in over 2 years. Or let's take the billboard out for the whole city so they can know when I'm ovulating. It almost feels like a very personal, private part of life becomes public, right? And it can feel like, the woman can feel like she's just like unsexy, unfeminine. And part of what we'll talk about is, how do we make sure to take care of the medical piece while also still being fiercely protective? And everyone has this, right? In all areas of life. Last night we were talking to some women about how do you find the beauty of sexuality and spirituality in our lives when we're struggling with infertility or when we're struggling with pain. Because both can exist, it takes a level of intentionality, but both can exist with the right effort. And with a man, often, a man can think, I don't know if she actually wants to have sex with me, or when she's with me, she just might see me as a sperm machine, right? And like the doctors all said, many of the times, there's a male issue connected to infertility, and that could feel very emasculating. The girl can feel like a failure, very unfeminine, and the man can feel like, wow, I'm really disappointing her. A lot of shame. And although it's hard for women to talk about infertility with men, I mean, you guys would know better, but a lot of men talk about how isolating it is because a lot of times there isn't conversation around that. Now, I just want to talk about being able to be protective over the relationship, intimacy. One of the things that's really important to know is that when intimate time was maybe once seen as pleasurable and intimate, it's often now associated with predictability and maybe even failure. So it can lead to a lot of sexual frustration. So I have just some tips to give for anyone who is thinking about this for themselves or a loved one. One is consider having sex outside of the fertile times, or in addition to the fertile times. It's important to be able to have this flirty, playful dynamic, connecting as a couple, connecting as two people who want to actually be able to connect with each other, not just with an end goal in mind. The next piece, which is part of being here, is making sure that you are connected to the right kind of support, to community, speaking to others who have gone through a journey like this, so you get inspiration. I know last night there was a woman who shared her story. Many people were talking about different experiences, and there was this feeling of, I'm not alone, because when we're alone, our problems feel even bigger, and two, that there's hope and there's a way through, although everyone's journey looks different. Of course, when you need, there's counseling, there's rabbis, there's resources to avail yourself of. The other thing I want to speak about, which I started with, is the concept of spirituality. I know that sometimes people will roll their eyes, and I know that sometimes on panels I've told people, you know, with the Jewish piece, people have a lot of complicated feelings towards God, Hashem, or religion, and I think it's important to be able to name those emotions, and at the very same time, when we look at the research, people who have capacity to believe in a higher power, in Hashem, or to invest in spirituality or a sense of meaning, there's a lot more healing and emotional energy that people feel in facing struggles. So one of the biggest things I would say is finding a way for you to add some spirituality into your life, reconnecting to God, reconnecting to a rabbi, but someone who really gets it, who helps you feel like there's a way through, right? And a lot of this is about surrendering and really entrusting our lives over, although it can feel really complicated, but allowing that support in. So I just want to say, just for a moment before I want to wrap up, because I know I've been speaking for a little bit, is if you could just take a moment right here, right now, notice that you're showing up for yourself. One of the biggest pieces about these events, about PUAH, is about being able to build our nation, to keep building, and building starts with first connecting with yourself. When we feel defeat, when we feel like we're stuck in fear, we feel disconnected, we're like the person who's running away from the lion. And what I encourage you to do is to offer yourself compassion, to be doing your best to connect with yourself, to connect with others, so that you can, in your very best way, keep building a life that feels beautiful for you and your future. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an incredible talk. All of the talks were, I found to be very inspirational and informative, so thank you. The hour is late, but we are happy to hear and field any questions that, that anyone has. Who wants to be the brave number one? Brave number one. Joelle. You have to speak loud. We're hard of hearing.
That's fine. When would somebody go to a reproductive endocrinologist versus a urologist? Like, how would they know who to go to?
No, I mean, start. I think most patients traditionally go to a reproductive endocrinologist because they often think that the female is the problem, and then they get referred to a urologist. But I've probably seen since the pandemic, there's a lot more awareness sessions like these. It's way more simple to get a sperm analysis and evaluate the man as opposed to doing all of the workup that Dr. Bardo spoke about. So tides are changing, so we are seeing some of the male partners wanting to get tested. Women are getting more powerful. They say, you go get tested first before I get tested. And so they're asking the guy to do the work first before they go. So in those cases, I see the couple first and then refer the patient if all of the workup on the male side is normal. But it's mostly male versus female, but most patients blame it on the female, and so they go to the reproductive endocrinologist first.
So, sorry, just to follow up. So, Dr.
Yes, that's, yeah, and you know, Dr. Amasami, he didn't get introduced, but I will introduce him as the up-and-coming international superstar in the field of reproductive urology. And when I say that, I actually mean that. He's had over 300 publications. He has a massive team of people that work with him doing research on all aspects. He's an excellent physician. We refer patients back and forth. I text him with questions in the middle of consults, and he writes back so I can actually answer the patient. And it's actually a wonderful relationship. But another reason, you know, so sometimes women know that there are issues, right? They're not getting their period, so they'll come and see me. They'll start there, and oftentimes I'll find that, well, there's multiple problems. It's not just with the male. With the female, it can also be with the male. So we do work a lot together. Why am I the only one that no one can hear? Do I just not speak loud enough?
He has an issue at home also. Like no one hears him. Like you don't know what you're saying. One point to add to the conversation is the halachic point that when we have to consider who is going to get tested first, whether it's going to be the female or the male, from a strictly halachic standpoint, there are no prohibitions or halachic sensitivities that need to be addressed when we're taking blood or doing an ultrasound on a female. When the semen analysis requires the procurement of sperm, and we know that there's an issue to masturbate, there's an issue to waste seed. So since we have that added level of halachic question, sometimes the rabbis and maybe the couple themselves would feel more comfortable working with the woman first, trying to identify if there are any female issues, and once it's proven that there are no female, then to justify the workup for the male, as opposed to jumping into the male when there are some halachic considerations. So that's another reason why some of the Jewish couples would prefer to go to the reproductive endocrinologist before going to a reproductive urologist.
Still make them do the same analysis.
I guess I just want some clarity on one point, because I'm not sure if you answered it. But so in the situation where maybe a woman for a transfer or a retrieval would end up on Shabbat, would you guys coordinate that on Shabbat? Can that happen, or is that kind of delayed?
When that question comes up, that there's a patient that will potentially have to have a retrieval on Shabbat, what I will typically do is I'll call my friend Dr. Bardos, and I'll say, Doc, you don't want a retrieval on Shabbos, I don't want a retrieval on Shabbos. Sometimes, and I always feel uncomfortable speaking in front of doctors talking about medicine, but it seems to me that there's no like golden minute that the retrieval must take place. It's a window of time. And sometimes the window can be a Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes it could be a Friday, Saturday, and it's a matter of when the doctor is comfortable doing that retrieval. And sometimes I've had a lot of success when patients will call very nervous, very afraid that they were just told from their doctor that they have an upcoming retrieval on Shabbos. I'm able to speak to the doctor, and I'll have this conversation, and the doctor will say, you know, we can do a Friday retrieval, that's okay, and that won't be compromising medical care. I think that we'll be able to have a successful retrieval on Friday. And sometimes the doctor will say, no, we could push them off to Sunday, and that'll be fine. There have been circumstances and situations where the doctor says, no, it needs to be Shabbos. If we wait till Sunday, no good. If we do Friday, it's going to be too early. And then we do work out with the patient to make sure that there's no Chilul Shabbos, and to allow for the doctors, the medical staff to do whatever they need to do, and to have the mashgichot there. And that means that the mashgichot are staying nearby over Shabbos, which is tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. It's a one little inkling, one little act of Mesiras Nefesh in an act of, or a life of tremendous Mesiras Nefesh that the mashgichot give to PUAH and to the patients. But staying over for Shabbos is a common thing. If it has to happen, so then we'll work it out. Do you have anything to add about that or no?
No, and that what you're saying is very true. So there's a lot of art to what we do. It's not strict science. A lot of it, and that's why it's important to really who you go to.
When you said that I was right, everyone heard you, by the way.
No, but that's why it is really important who you go to, where you go, who you choose to work with, as far as the clinic, the physician, someone who's going to be open to work with your needs. You know,
Yeah.
so for for example, in my clinic, all my Shomer Shabbos patients, even if their normal blood time would have fallen out on Shabbos, they come Friday and Sunday instead. So yeah, is it an extra visit? It is. Does my clinic eat the cost? We do. But that's what we do it because that's how it works best for the patients. So I mean, sometimes that can work. Not everyone does that work for. There definitely are times where, you know, if I felt from a PUAH nefesh standpoint, I would definitely say that. I guess one of my questions that I have for you, Rabbi, is what category do we place the patients with infertility into from a halachic standpoint?
Everyone has another hour and a half, right? What Dr. Bardos asked is, when it comes to Shabbos, so there are different levels of sickness on Shabbos. Some people just have a headache. And if you have a headache on Shabbos, sometimes the halacha is X. If you are incapacitated, the halacha is Y. If you are in a life-threatening situation, the halacha is, comes after Y? Z. So, what status do we classify a patient who is undergoing infertility treatment? This is a huge debate amongst the poskim. We generally assume, it's not unanimous, but we generally assume that they have that status of a middle category, someone who's incapacitated, a chol she'ein bo sakana. They don't just have a basic headache, but it's also not life-threatening. So the reason why that's important is that anything that needs to take place from a medical standpoint can take place through a non-Jewish person. You can ask a guy, you don't even have to hint. You can ask a guy to do whatever you need for a chol she'ein bo sakana. And therefore, should the patient need to make their way to the lab and they won't be able to walk, they must go in a cab, they must travel, perhaps having a non-Jewish driver. Whether it's blood work, the non-Jewish person, the non-Jewish phlebotomist nurse can take the blood. Maybe it's kedai to have a non-Jewish doctor, or whatever, you know. That would be the most basic understanding of what the status of a woman who is in the fertility treatment, but not everyone agrees to that.
Wait, can I just say something?
Absolutely.
I agree with everything you're saying, but no, what I do want to say is, and I'm not going to say this as the rabbi, one of the biggest things that I have asked my clients or reminded clients to do, and patients that I've worked with, is to advocate for yourself and your situation when it comes to halachic issues. Because what rabbis do is that they go on like a windy route because they have to be very careful with halacha, and they can't say anything right now. No, with all due respect, you're laughing. But when it comes to specific situations, it's so specific to your situation, your health, your struggles, your emotional health, your relationship, the supports you do or don't have, and the medical complexities that are going on. One of the most unique things that I've seen is when somebody has like a good rabbi or a good resource, just like you have a good doctor, having someone who really is in your corner so you feel less alone and you feel like the Torah and your life is on your side and it's doable. So I just want to say, if there's ever a question, like there's no shame to ask. Rather ask and get the right support, and ask again if you weren't clear, or if the situation changes. So I just want to say that.
Yeah.
And another thing I'll add to that is that I frequently will speak with patients' Rav, and that's another important thing, is that the answer you will get is based on the question you ask, right? I think, so knowing what to ask, knowing how to explain the question is really important as well.
Have you ever had a situation of another woman hosting the pregnancy of a couple? And same question, Rabbi, is it okay, and what if the woman should be also Jewish that hosts the pregnancy?
Sorry.
So, do you have 12 hours?
Yes, at least.
The answer, from my standpoint, yes. We definitely see that, had it before, but I'll let the rabbi answer that thorny question.
In 60 seconds, because it's a 60-hour discussion, but in 60 seconds, it is very difficult to define halachic motherhood. When a woman gets pregnant naturally, her own eggs, and then or IVF, and she's her own eggs, and then it's implanted in her own uterus, so she's unequivocally the mother because she has both the genetic relationship with the child as well as the element of being the birth mother. When you divorce the two and you have a birth mother who is not the genetic mother, so how does halacha define motherhood? Do we base it on the genetic relationship? the genetic component, and the fact that she contributed the genetic material gives her to the title of motherhood, or is the woman who carries the baby, is she called the mother? Some would say yes, she gave birth to the mother. Others would say to the baby. Others would say no, you just served as an incubator for the embryo. There is no one answer to that question. I mean, we're Jews. There's no answer. There's a machlokas. It's a debate. It's an argument. So, given the fact that there are many, many, many world-renowned rabbis who hold and maintain that the mother is the birth mother, and there are equal to a number of well-respected and world-renowned rabbis who hold that it's the genetic mother, so therefore we try to err on the side of caution, or at least we would consider if there's any non-Jewish component, non-Jewish ingredient, whether it's a non-Jewish host, let's say it's a gestational carrier who's not Jewish, carrying a Jewish couple's eggs and sperm, since perhaps the mother is the birth mother, we would treat that child as potentially not Jewish, and we would require them to do some type of conversion. And similarly, if it's a couple, Jewish couple, there's no uterine issue, she's going to carry the pregnancy, but she has diminished ovarian reserve, she has no ovarian function, she has no eggs, and they need a donor egg, and they use a non-Jewish egg. So then, since it was a non-Jewish egg, although she was the host mother and she gave birth to the baby, nevertheless, we would require a conversion for that child as well. Issues when it comes to, issues when it comes to using siblings, genetic material from siblings, issues when it comes to using a married donor versus or a married surrogate would greatly depend on this machlokas. If you wanted to do it, many people say the best thing to do is to have a surrogacy, which was your question, a single Jewish woman carrying the baby, then you'd have no issue. A single Jewish woman carrying the baby, then you'd have no issue because she'd be Jewish by virtue of the fact that it was both the egg and the mother, and there'd be no issue with the fact that she's married, carrying someone else's embryo. That would be the best thing. It's very difficult to find, but in an ideal world, a single Jewish carrier would be the ideal. I think we have time for just one or two more questions.
Oh, I have a question for Dr. Rothschild. When you're looking at the semen analysis, you were saying what would depict whether or not that male has good quality. Is it the morphology? Is it the sperm count? How do we know that man is fertile?
Got it. So, three things that we look for in a sperm analysis. One, to see what the concentration is, like how many number of sperm there are. So only if you have enough sperm does the question of quality actually come in. So hopefully if they have enough sperm, then we look at things like how fast it's moving, or the percentage of sperm that are moving and alive. So that gives us a good quality of whether it's alive or not. And then after that is when you look at sperm morphology. Is it actually shaped well? And can these sperm actually go on to conceive naturally, or are there defects in the actual sperm that required IVF where it needs to actually get put into the egg? So usually sperm number is the first thing we start with, and then the next is whether what percentage of these sperm are actually moving or not and alive, and then finally the shape of the sperm.
Follow-up question to that, if I can.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about the fact that, let's say, because oftentimes I'll have couples in my office that now the semen analysis was normal, so the male immediately turns to the female and is like, "Meh." And I always say, no, not so fast. So maybe you could talk about that there are other aspects, or how good is a semen analysis at determining whether, just because you have normal sperm, does that mean that that sperm's capable of fertilizing?
Can I add one more thing? No, I don't need the mic. Can you contribute recurrent miscarriages, recurrent pregnancy loss to sperm quality?
Yeah, good, very good question. So, unfortunately, the sperm analysis is its own enemy. So, it is the best test of male fertility that we have, but it's also the worst test of male fertility that we have, because it says nothing about what the exact sperm DNA is. How many places within the sperm DNA are they actually broken? It says nothing about how many mutations all of the sperm carries. Is there all bad genetics there? And when you talked about a lot about PGT and genetic testing of the embryo, if the genetic testing of the embryo comes back all bad, and the female was 28 or 30 years old, is it the sperm fault? So yes. So thankfully now we have advances in sperm testing. We actually do it at our own lab, where we're able to do something called sperm DNA fragmentation. How many places within the sperm DNA are they actually broken? And this can absolutely lead to both recurrent pregnancy loss and recurrent IVF failure as a cause. We always think it's an egg issue, it's a uterus issue, but there are places along in the IVF cycle where the sperm does play an important role, and I think it's important to look at things like sperm DNA and mutations when we do get to that point and we have some information that we have to go back and look at the man, because just because you have a lot of sperm doesn't necessarily mean they also work well.
I think one last question.
I'm just curious, like with all the technologies that we have, why there's like a finite amount of days that the embryo can live outside of the uterus, and like if there's any because of that finite window. If let's say the last stage of day 5 lands on Shabbat, is the doctor allowed to freeze on Shabbat? Or would the doctor be able to wait till day 6 and then risk the fact that the embryos might die because sometimes they die between day 5 and day 6?
That's a multifaceted but excellent question. So the answer is that embryos can last longer. Typically, though, the conditions in which they're grown in and the way the labs are designed is to get to the blast stage. The blast stage stops basically around day 5. Sometimes it'll be day 6 for later growing embryos, sometimes even day 7. But what can happen is that if an embryo reaches day 5 and it's growing appropriately, by day 6, the quality or the ability for it to then be implanted based on the technology we have now may start going down. And we do see that the longer the embryos are taking to get to the point which we can put them back, the lower the chance of a pregnancy. Part of it is we're legally not able to grow embryos outside of the body past a certain point, which is why most of the research hasn't gotten there yet. But there definitely are people looking at creating, an incubator, basically an artificial incubator. So there will be, and that's the next frontier in halacha is.
Who's the mother?
Exactly. When you use, no, seriously, there's research looking at using bovines, so using, either cow or pigs' uteruses, and then trying to use that to grow, especially for, patients who have, let's say they have recurrent implantation failure, so they're not able to get pregnant, or when they do get pregnant, they're always delivering early, or they're miscarrying frequently. So there definitely is research looking at that, and there's many halachic issues that end up coming with that. But to answer your halachic question of what the doctor's allowed to do on day 5, I'll hand it to the rabbi.
Non-Jewish doctors should do the freeze. But definitely go ahead. If the doctor feels that it's medically appropriate to freeze, they can freeze on Shabbos. A non-Jew should be the one to put it into the liquid nitrogen. Okay, I think we could all be here for hours, but... Oh. If you're talking specifically about a case of surrogacy, so surrogacy is actually not such an issue because surrogacy is not anonymous. We know who the surrogate is, and since there's no anonymity, we know who she is. We know who her biological children are, her own children, and there is an understanding amongst the couples who used her as a surrogate who know who she is. Huh?
It may be confusing surrogate and gestational care.
No, if you compare it to egg donation is typically anonymous. So you can have one egg donor who is donating multiple cycles, and you could even split those cycles, and therefore you could have in 3 cycles, you can have 6 couples all using those eggs. So there's a serious issue, because, and especially the fact that that donor is anonymous. You don't know who that donor is, as opposed to a surrogate or gestational carrier where you know. So it's just like any other shidduch. You're not meshadich with a brother or sister, because so we know who the people are. When it's an egg donor and it's all anonymous, so then it becomes very difficult. And the truth is, it's a very good question, without a very good answer, other than the parents who have children through egg donation have to take it very seriously, the fact that when it comes to shidduchim, they have to be mindful of the fact and cognizant that their prospective shidduch may have come from an egg donor as well, and they have to be forthcoming and communicate to see to it that their prospective shidduch is not from the same donor. Now, although it's anonymous, you don't know who your donor is. You don't know if you don't know that your donor is Sarah Cohen, but you will have some type of identifying information, such as a birthday. So if we do a cycle and we know that our donor, we don't know that her name is Sarah Cohen, but I know that she was born on March 4th, so 20 years from now, when that daughter or son is in shidduchim, so you may have to say, and you have this conversation, which might be a very uncomfortable one, and you say that, oh, wow, your daughter or your son is also from an egg donor? Take out that crinkled piece of paper. What date do you have? You have March 4th? I have March 4th. That's a huge issue. If you have September and I have March, it's less of an issue. Also, sometimes you have families. Your son comes home dating a girl. She's 1 of 10. I can't say for sure, but chances are, if she's 1 of 10, she's probably not from an egg donor. Okay? So, if she comes home, he comes home and says, I'm dating someone. Oh, how many siblings are there in the family? 2. Oh, how old are the parents? Pretty old. Wait a minute. They must have been on the older side before having those children. Again, there's certain assumptions, but what the bottom line is that you're asking a very good question, and it really is the responsibility of the parents to be prudent and to be cognizant and aware of the fact that it's an issue and they have to stay clear. The truth is, we also give an advice to people to tell someone else, someone younger. That way we're talking about a child who's going to be born and then in 20, 25 years from now is going to be dating, right? I don't know where I'm going to be in 20, 25 years, right? So to have someone, hopefully I'll be alive in 20, 25 years, but we don't know. Nobody knows. To tell somebody else about this, so that way if the parents are no longer around, at least there's someone a little bit younger who can step in and inform the child that they have to do that research. But it's a very good question. It's really a very good question. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for the Shul for hosting this. Dr. Ramasamy, Dr. Goldstein, Dr. Bardos, and thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to speak to our panelists or feel free to speak to and call PUAH at your convenience. Take care and have a good night.
Great question. Yes, no, absolutely.
Yes.
Hey, Rabbi, how are you? Yes.
Thank you so much. What are you guys doing research on? I mean, one is the phone, one is...
Ozempic, cannabis, all that. Thank you. Absolutely.
It does really make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Hi. Thank you for being here.
Okay.
I never did that, ever.
The ovulation test.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that like normal that I never did that?
I mean, you only do it if you're trying to time
Thank you for being here. Were you with your mom or were you with?
So
I just
for
met
my,
her.
the nurse told me to do that.
You know each other for a bit.
predict your kids, but is that because